What if the very foundation of your faith and trust were suddenly shattered before your eyes in the place you least expected, your beloved place of worship? Imagine a serene Sunday morning in Baltimore, Maryland, transformed in an instant into a scene of shocking betrayal and heart-wrenching drama. Hopeful Spirit Church, a sanctuary known for its community service and the deep faith of its congregation, is about to become the epicenter of a scandal that rocks the core of its devoted followers. Under the stewardship of Pastor Michael Robinson, a man celebrated for turning his tumultuous past into powerful lessons of redemption, a secret is lurking. This secret, so profound and unexpected, is poised to unravel not just individual lives, but the entire community's sense of unity and trust. Stay tuned to True Crime Stories ZM as we delve deeper into this gripping saga, unraveling the complex layers of human emotions and societal pressures that led to this shocking moment. Subscribe and join us as we seek to understand not just the actions, but the deep-seated reasons behind them, in a story that promises to challenge our perceptions of right and wrong. The vibrant hymns and heartfelt prayers of the Hopeful Spirit Church's congregation abruptly came to a halt when the back doors of the sanctuary were flung open with a force that echoed ominously through the vast room. Sunlight mixed with the crisp autumn air rushed in, framing a figure that stood in stark contrast to the warmth and unity inside. Jacob Ellis, a 19-year-old from the same Baltimore neighborhood that many in the congregation called home, stood at the threshold, his silhouette casting a long shadow across the church's ornate floor. The morning light revealed his disheveled appearance, clothes unkempt, hair wild, and most alarmingly, his hands unsteadily clutching a gun. The congregation, moments ago immersed in a state of worship and community, now froze under the weight of a palpable, chilling silence. Jacob's entrance was not merely dramatic, it was laden with an air of desperation and unresolved anguish. His eyes, wide and turbulent, scanned the room, locking onto the figure standing at the pulpit. Pastor Michael Robinson, who had just been leading his flock in a sermon about forgiveness and renewal, now faced a test of his teachings like never before. As Jacob took shaky steps forward, the polished wooden floors of the church creaked under the weight of his heavy boots, each step resonating like a foreboding drumbeat across the hearts of the congregation. The air, once filled with the fragrance of polished pews and worn Bibles, now hung heavy with fear and uncertainty. Michael! Jacob's voice, breaking the silence, trembled with a cocktail of rage and pain, reverberating off the stained glass images of peace and serenity. His accusation cut through the sacred atmosphere, turning the church's sanctuary into a courtroom of judgment. You lied to us all. The congregation sat in stunned disbelief, their eyes darting between their pastor and this young man whose life had evidently fractured under the weight of undisclosed truths. Mothers tightened their grip on their children, couples exchanged looks of worry, and elders leaned forward in their pews, straining to understand the nature of the unfolding drama. Pastor Robinson, with a calmness that belied the adrenaline surely coursing through his veins, slowly stepped down from the altar, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. Jacob, let's talk, he implored, his voice steady, yet imbued with an urgency that underscored the gravity of the moment. But the plea hung unanswered as the sound of the church bell, distant yet clear, punctuated the tension. It was a stark reminder of the sanctuary's purpose, peace, which now seemed a distant memory. Jacob's advance did not falter, and as he moved closer, the congregation's fear escalated into quiet chaos. Whispers turned into hushed prayers, and prayers into silent cries for safety. The sanctuary, a place meant for refuge and reflection, was now a theater of a very human drama, highlighting the fragility of the community and the secrets that lurked beneath its surface. This critical moment was not just a confrontation, but a pivotal turning point for everyone present, exposing the thin lines between faith, forgiveness, and the raw wounds of betrayal. How this situation would resolve hung uncertainly in the balance, challenging the core of their beliefs and the strength of their unity. As Jacob Ellis continued his determined march down the aisle of Hopeful Spirit Church, the murmur of the congregation hushed into a stunned silence. Each step echoed against the hardwood floors, a stark and dissonant counterpoint to the soft organ music that had filled the air moments earlier. The congregation, a diverse tapestry of Baltimore's community, watched with wide eyes and bated breath as the young man's voice cracked the veneer of their Sunday morning tranquility. "Give the kid some respect for something," he said. "You preached trust and honesty, Michael. How could you betray everything you stand for?" Jacob's voice boomed, his accusations slicing through the solemn atmosphere of the church. His face, contorted with emotion, betrayed a mix of betrayal and heartbreak that resonated painfully with those who looked on. Pastor Michael Robinson, a figure of stoic calm amidst the storm, stood his ground at the pulpit. His eyes, which had guided many through spiritual and personal tempests, now reflected a profound sorrow as they met Jacob's anguished gaze. The congregation could only watch, immobilized by the unfolding drama, their faith in their pastor and the stability of their spiritual community wavering under the weight of Jacob's raw, palpable pain. The confrontation escalated as Jacob stopped midway down the aisle, his every word etching a deep silence into the morning. "You say you care about us, but you're just another liar hiding behind that pulpit." The accusation struck a chord, and a collective gasp rippled through the pews. The air grew heavy, charged with a mix of anticipation and dread, as the community braced for Pastor Michael's response. With the congregation hanging on to every word, Pastor Michael lowered his hand slowly, his expression one of compassion and regret. "Jacob, I understand you're hurt," he began, his voice a calm contrast to the palpable tension in the room. "Let's discuss this privately, please. This isn't the way." But Jacob was beyond consolation. "No, they need to hear it, Pastor. They need to know who you really are." His voice, tinged with bitterness and betrayal, echoed off the stained glass, sending shivers down the spines of the assembled parishioners. The confrontation at Hopeful Spirit Church was more than a mere dispute. It was a visible fracture in the facade of a community leader witnessed by an entire congregation. The revelations and accusations that Jacob brought forth in that moment challenged not just the character of Pastor Michael, but also the very ideals upon which the church prided itself. As the standoff continued, the impact of Jacob's words began to settle over the room like a heavy cloak, leaving the community to wonder about the secrets that lurked behind the sermons and the smiles. The tension was palpable, a living thing that thrummed through the air, as the once tranquil sanctuary transformed into a court of moral judgment. The resolution of this confrontation would undoubtedly reshape the future of Hopeful Spirit Church and its congregation, forever altering their perceptions of truth and leadership. The tension inside Hopeful Spirit Church had built to a crescendo, and as Pastor Michael made one final plea for calm, the air thickened with an almost palpable sense of dread. Jacob Ellis, the young man at the heart of the turmoil, trembled visibly, his emotions a tempest that threatened to overwhelm not just him but everyone present. The congregation held its breath, praying silently for a peaceful resolution, but the unfolding events were far from their fervent hopes. With a sudden, swift movement that seemed to rupture the very fabric of the morning's tranquility, Jacob raised the gun. The sanctuary, a space that had always been a refuge from the world's chaos, was instantly transformed into a scene of profound terror. Time seemed to slow as Jacob pulled the trigger, the sound of the gunshot reverberating off the church's high ceilings and stained glass windows, a sacrilegious echo in the holy space. The first bullet struck Pastor Michael in the shoulder, spinning him around with the force of the impact. A gasp rose from the congregation, a collective voice of shock and fear as their pastor stumbled, gripping the altar for support. The second shot followed quickly, more deliberate, and hit him in the abdomen, causing him to collapse in a heap on the church's polished steps, his robes spreading around him like a dark pool. Panic ensued. The congregation, moments ago frozen in shock, now erupted into chaos. Chairs clattered to the floor as people scrambled for the exits, their cries filling the air, a discordant chorus of fear and confusion. Parents clutched their children, pulling them close as they rushed toward the doors, desperate to escape the nightmare that had invaded their place of worship. The elderly and the infirm were helped along by stronger hands, all semblance of the morning's peaceful assembly shattered by the reality of violence in their midst. Amid the pandemonium, Jacob stood still, the gun hanging loosely in his hand, his chest heaving with ragged breaths. The anger that had fueled his actions seemed to drain away, leaving behind a stark realization of what he had done. His eyes, wide and haunted, flicked from the fallen pastor to the fleeing congregation, the weight of his actions crashing down upon him like the heavy toll of the church bell. In the background, the wail of sirens grew louder as emergency services converged on the church. Police officers, their faces set in grim lines, entered the sanctuary, their weapons drawn as they assessed the scene. Jacob, his defiance crumbled into despair, offered no resistance as they took the gun from his hand and led him away in handcuffs. His head bowed, the fight gone, he seemed suddenly smaller, a young man crushed by the magnitude of his own grievous mistake. And that's as the last of the congregation spilled out into the street, the sanctuary lay eerily silent but for the moans of Pastor Michael. A small group of parishioners, too shocked or unwilling to leave their pastor, circled around him, their hands reaching out to offer comfort, their voices lifting in prayers for his survival. His wife, rushing to his side, pressed her hands against his wounds, her sobs mingling with his labored breaths, a poignant duet of pain and fear. Outside, the once peaceful Sunday morning was now a tableau of emergency vehicles and onlookers. The community, drawn by the sound of sirens and the sight of their neighbors in distress, gathered in clusters, their faces etched with concern and disbelief. Rumors and whispered questions passed through the crowd like a restless wind, each person trying to comprehend how their sanctuary, a place of hope and healing, had become a scene of violence and sorrow. Back inside, the air was heavy with the iron tang of blood and the sharp scent of gunpowder, a grim testament to the events that had transpired. The stained glass windows, once vibrant with the light of morning, now cast a somber light on the altar where Pastor Michael lay, a reminder of the fragile line between peace and violence, between faith and despair. The hopeful Spirit Church, its very name a promise of refuge, would forever bear the scars of this day, a day when the echoes of gunshots disrupted its sacred promise, leaving a congregation in mourning and a community in shock. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, the sanctuary of Hopeful Spirit Church transformed from a scene of frantic escape to a somber vigil. Pastor Michael Robinson, critically injured, lay on the church steps, his breathing labored and shallow. The vibrant robes that had once symbolized his spiritual authority were now marred with blood, a stark contrast to the pure white altar cloth that fluttered gently with each passing breeze from the open church doors. As the last of the congregation fled the sanctuary, a few brave souls returned, driven by a sense of duty and compassion to aid their fallen pastor. Among them was Eleanor, the church's longtime organist, who knelt beside Michael, her hands trembling as she pressed them against his wounds in a futile attempt to stem the flow of blood. Her eyes were wide with fear but resolute, reflecting a deep-seated faith not just in God, but in the community she had served for decades. Outside, the chaos of earlier began to give way to an eerie calm as emergency services took control of the scene. Police cordoned off the area with yellow tape, their faces grim and focused as they began to piece together the events that had led to the tragedy. Ambulances idled nearby, paramedics rushing in and out of the church with medical supplies, their movements swift and practiced. Meanwhile, Jacob Ellis was led to a police cruiser, his hands cuffed behind his back. The anger and determination that had propelled him into the church had evaporated, replaced by a profound sense of despair. Tears streamed down his face, unchecked and unabated, as the gravity of his actions settled around him like a suffocating cloak. He slumped against the car, his gaze lost to the ground, unwilling or unable to meet the eyes of those who watched him with a mixture of pity and horror. Inside, the sounds of sirens and murmuring voices were distant echoes to Pastor Michael, who was only dimly aware of the figures moving around him. His wife, Annette, arrived breathless and tear-streaked, pushing through the small crowd to reach her husband's side. She knelt beside him, her hands finding his in a grip that was both tender and desperate. "Michael, stay with me, please," she whispered, her voice breaking with each word. Paramedics eventually made their way to Michael, gently but firmly moving the well-meaning parishioners aside to attend to his injuries. They worked quickly, applying pressure bandages and administering emergency treatments to stabilize him, before carefully lifting him onto a stretcher. Annette stayed close, her hand never leaving Michael's as they wheeled him out of the church, the stained glass windows casting patterns of light and shadow across his pale face. As the stretcher disappeared into the back of an ambulance, the remaining onlookers formed a makeshift circle outside the church, their hands joined in prayer. The Rev. Clara Hughes, the assistant pastor, led them in a solemn prayer for healing and peace, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Lord, guide us through this storm," she prayed. "Bring healing to Michael, forgiveness to Jacob, and strength to us all." The ambulance's doors closed with a soft thud, and as it drove away, sirens blaring and lights flashing, a profound silence settled over the crowd. The reality of the day's events was sinking in, leaving each person to grapple with their thoughts and the impact of the violence on their lives and faith. Back in the now empty church, the aftermath was a poignant tableau of disruption and distress. Hymnals lay scattered across the floor, pews were askew, and a single child's shoe sat forgotten under a seat, a mute testament to the panic and rush to escape. The air still smelled faintly of incense and candle wax, a reminder of the sanctuary's sacred purpose, now overshadowed by the day's tragic events. As the community began to disperse, many lingered, unwilling to leave the place that had been a source of solace and now a site of sorrow. Conversations were hushed as people exchanged stories of Michael's kindness and leadership, each anecdote a small act of defiance against the chaos that had sought to undermine their faith. The day had started with songs of worship and it ended with prayers for recovery and reconciliation. Hopeful Spirit Church, its congregation and its leaders faced a long road to healing, but even in the shadow of tragedy, the seeds of forgiveness and renewal were already taking root. The community's resilience, tested by gunfire and grief, would eventually lead them back to the light, reaffirming their commitment to peace, understanding, and each other. As the chaos in Hopeful Spirit Church began to subside, the focus shifted swiftly to the emergency response, which unfolded with precision and urgency. The Baltimore police had arrived on the scene within minutes of the first 911 call, their quick action reflecting the seriousness of the situation. Officers secured the church, methodically clearing the area to ensure no further threats lingered. Their presence, marked by the sound of radios crackling and orders being issued, brought a somber orderliness to the scene that had been absent moments before. Jacob Ellis, the young man whose actions had precipitated the crisis, was detained near the church entrance, his hands secured behind his back. The police handled him with a professionalism that was efficient yet not devoid of compassion, recognizing the emotional turmoil evident in his tear-streaked face. As they led him to a waiting police car, Jacob seemed almost oblivious to the gravity of his surroundings, his mind caught in the throes of regret and shock. The officers guided him gently but firmly, ensuring his safety as well as that of others around. Meanwhile, the paramedics, having stabilized Pastor Michael Robinson inside the church, were preparing to transport him to the hospital. The stretcher, laden with the weight of Hopeful Spirit's beloved pastor, was maneuvered carefully through the narrow aisles, past the pews that bore silent witness to the morning's violence. Michael was pale, his breathing shallow but steady, thanks to the oxygen mask fitted over his face. His wife, Annette, accompanied him, her presence a constant reassurance as they loaded him into the ambulance. The scene outside the church had drawn a crowd, a mix of concerned community members and media personnel who had arrived to cover the unfolding drama. The flashing lights of the police cruisers and ambulances bathed the area in a surreal glow, punctuating the morning with a stark reminder of the incident's severity. As the ambulance doors closed behind Michael and Annette, a hush fell over the onlookers, many of whom bowed their heads in prayer or whispered words of support. The drive to the hospital was tense, with the paramedics monitoring Michael's vital signs closely, adjusting their equipment and administering medication to manage his pain and stabilize his condition. Annette sat by his side, her hand clasped tightly around his, whispering words of love and encouragement, her voice a soothing balm in the sterile chill of the ambulance. Upon arriving at the hospital, Michael was immediately rushed to the trauma center where a team of doctors and nurses were ready to take over. The efficiency of the hospital staff was a well-oiled machine in action. Each member played a crucial role in the orchestration of care that awaited Michael. Annette, though overwhelmed by the whirlwind of medical activity, was guided to a waiting area where she was kept informed of her husband's status. The initial assessments were cautious but hopeful. The injuries were serious, but with prompt and comprehensive medical care, the prognosis was guardedly optimistic. Back at the church, the police had begun their investigation, cordoning off the area as a crime scene. Detectives moved through the space methodically, taking photographs, collecting evidence, and speaking with witnesses. Each interview was conducted with a sensitivity to the morning's traumatic events, with officers providing reassurances and support to the community of Hopeful Spirit Church, though physically dispersed by the day's events, remained connected through a network of calls, messages, and social media, sharing updates on Michael's condition and organizing support for his family. The church itself, now empty, still echoed with the remnants of the day's terror, but also with the stronger, enduring notes of faith and resilience. It stood despite everything as a beacon of hope, its spirit unbroken, ready to heal and to harbor its flock once again. As the sun set over Baltimore, casting long shadows across the church's facade, the congregation knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. Yet, in the face of adversity, their resolve to come together, to forgive, and to rebuild was firmer than ever, testament to the enduring power of faith and community in the darkest of times. Pastor Michael Robinson's journey to the pulpit of Hopeful Spirit Church was a testament to the transformative power of faith and redemption. Raised in a troubled neighborhood of Baltimore, Michael's early life was marred by challenges that many in his community faced: poverty, violence, and the ever-present lure of street life. As a young man, he had found himself drawn into a circle of friends whose choices often led them down dangerous paths. However, unlike many of his peers, Michael found an escape through the intervention of a local pastor who saw potential in him and introduced him to the church. The church became Michael's sanctuary and the gospel his guide. As he embraced his faith, he also began to see a future beyond the confines of his circumstances. He threw himself into his studies and community work, determined to repay the second chance he had been given. By his mid-20s, Michael had not only graduated from seminary, but had become a dynamic youth minister known for his empathy and ability to connect with those who were walking the same troubled path he had once walked. His rise to the head pastor of Hopeful Spirit Church was a beacon of hope to many, showcasing the possibility of change and the power of a community united by faith. Under his leadership, the church expanded its outreach programs, and Michael's influence grew both within the church walls and in the broader community. However, amidst this narrative of success, a complicated and deeply personal story was unfolding that few were privy to. It began innocently enough when Michael met Jacob Ellis, a teenager from a difficult background, not unlike his own. Jacob, reserved and introspective, struggled with his identity and the harsh realities of his life. Michael saw in Jacob a reflection of his younger self and took it upon himself to mentor the young man. Their relationship developed as mentor and mentee, with Michael providing the guidance and understanding that Jacob so desperately needed. However, as they spent more time together, the boundaries of their relationship began to blur. What started as mentorship slowly evolved into a clandestine relationship that neither fully understood or could control. Michael, recognizing the potential consequences of their relationship, wrestled with his responsibilities as a pastor and the feelings he had developed for Jacob. He struggled internally with the dual aspects of his life, trying to reconcile his public persona with his private complexities. Jacob, for his part, became increasingly attached and emotionally dependent on Michael, seeing him not just as a mentor, but as a significant figure in his life. When Jacob began to sense Michael pulling away, pressured by the guilt of their hidden relationship and the fear of exposure, he felt betrayed and abandoned. His emotional turmoil, compounded by the secrecy and the fear of rejection, led him to confront Michael publicly, which tragically escalated to the violent encounter in the church. The shooting not only exposed the secret relationship, but also cast a long shadow over Michael's reputation and the integrity he had worked so hard to build. The congregation was left in shock, grappling with the duality of their pastor's life. The respected, inspirational leader, and the man involved in a scandal that contradicted the very morals he preached. As Michael lay in the hospital battling for his life, the community he had built was forced to confront the complexities of human relationships and the challenges of upholding ideals in the face of human frailties. The revelations about Michael's past and his fall from grace opened up difficult conversations about forgiveness, judgment, and the path forward for both him and the church community he had once so faithfully led. The aftermath of the shooting at Hopeful Spirit Church brought with it a whirlwind of emotions and revelations, casting long shadows across what had been a tight-knit community. The public exposure of the secret relationship between Pastor Michael Robinson and Jacob Ellis reverberated through the congregation, sparking a range of reactions from disbelief and betrayal to empathy and concern. In the days following the incident, the church community found themselves grappling with the reality of the hidden dynamics that had led to such a tragic outcome. The news that their respected pastor, a figure seen as a paragon of virtue and a guiding light, had been involved in a relationship that crossed ethical and possibly legal boundaries with a much younger member of his flock, caused profound distress and disillusionment. Community meetings were hastily organized by church elders who were equally shaken by the revelations. These meetings became forums for airing grief, confusion, and anger, but also for members to seek understanding and healing. Some members expressed a sense of betrayal, feeling that the spiritual guidance they had received from Pastor Michael was now tainted. Others argued for compassion and forgiveness, pointing to Michael's long-standing service and commitment to the community. Amidst the congregational turmoil, the media descended on the community, eager to untangle the story of a pastor fallen from grace and the young man whose life was intertwined with his in such a controversial and dramatic way. Reporters lingered outside the church and hospital, seeking comments from any willing to speak and piecing together the narrative that had led to the shooting. The relationship between Michael and Jacob, once revealed, was dissected for its implications. Discussions revolved around the power dynamics at play, the ethical responsibilities of a spiritual leader, and the vulnerabilities of a young man like Jacob, who had sought mentorship and found something far more complex and ultimately destructive. Legal experts and ethicists weighed in through various media discussing the boundaries of pastoral relationships and the moral expectations placed upon community leaders. This discourse extended into online forums and social media, where the wider public debated the nuances of trust, leadership, and moral failure. Inside the church, the elders faced the daunting task of navigating the crisis while supporting both the congregation's healing and the legal processes that were unfolding. They reached out to other spiritual leaders and professional counselors for guidance on how to support their members through the trauma and restore trust in their leadership. Jacob, meanwhile, faced his own set of challenges. Detained and under psychological evaluation, he struggled with the public scrutiny of his actions and the complex feelings he harbored towards Michael. His family, protective yet bewildered by the events, tried to maintain a low profile, dealing with their private anguish and the stigma now attached to their name. Annette Robinson, Michael's wife, found herself in an excruciating position, torn between her loyalty to her husband and her devastation over the revelations. She navigated her role with dignity, focusing on Michael's recovery and the future of their family. Her presence at Michael's bedside was constant, a testament to her resolve and the vows they had shared, even as the foundation of their marriage was shaken. As Michael recovered in the hospital, his consciousness oscillating between clarity and medication-induced haze, he was forced to confront the repercussions of his decisions. The man who had once delivered sermons about truth and redemption now lay in reflection on his own need for both. The crisis at Hopeful Spirit Church was a poignant reminder of the human flaws that can exist behind facades of moral integrity and spiritual leadership. It prompted a deeper examination of personal and communal values, challenging the congregation to think critically about forgiveness, accountability, and the paths to redemption. And as the community wrestled with these issues, the hope was that from the pain and chaos could emerge a stronger, more understanding and empathetic collective, capable of moving forward with renewed faith and commitment. The scandal that unfolded at Hopeful Spirit Church reverberated deeply through the church community, leaving a palpable sense of betrayal and confusion among the members. The shooting and the revelation of Pastor Michael Robinson's secret relationship with Jacob Ellis not only disrupted the physical sanctity of the church, but also shattered the spiritual trust that the congregation had placed in their leader. In the days following the incident, the church became the epicenter of a community struggling to reconcile the man they revered with the revelations of his concealed actions. Many members felt a profound sense of disillusionment. Their spiritual guide, who had preached integrity and morality, was now at the heart of a scandal that contradicted everything he stood for. This crisis of faith prompted a range of reactions from the churchgoers, from anger and demands for accountability to compassion and calls for forgiveness. In response to the crisis, the church elders organized several community forums, facilitated by mental health professionals, to provide a space for members to express their feelings and seek comfort. These gatherings were charged with emotion as people voiced their hurt and confusion while grappling with the complexity of forgiveness. Support groups sprang up within the community, focusing on healing and reconciliation, reflecting the congregation's desire to find a path forward through collective empathy and understanding. The local and even national media closely followed the story, adding layers of public scrutiny that only intensified the scandal. Journalists camped outside the church and hospital, eager to capture the reactions of church members and any updates on Michael's condition and the legal proceedings facing Jacob. This media attention often felt invasive to the community, turning their personal pain into public spectacle. The regular church services witnessed a significant drop in attendance in the weeks following the shooting. Some members found it difficult to return to the scene of such traumatic events, while others needed time to reflect on their spiritual journey without the immediate influence of the institution that was now under question. However, a committed core group continued to attend, driven by a resolve to uphold the church as a sanctuary for healing and spiritual nourishment. The church's youth programs and outreach initiatives also felt the impact. Parents became more cautious and participation dropped as trust waned. The church leadership responded by implementing new safety and transparency measures to reassure the community of their commitment to safeguarding all members, especially the most vulnerable. The path to rebuilding trust was slow and fraught with challenges. The elders took proactive steps by initiating an independent review of the church's governance and pastoral conduct. They invited an external Christian leadership organization to audit practices and suggest reforms that might prevent such issues from arising in the future. Despite the turmoil, many in the congregation began to reflect on the teachings of forgiveness and redemption that were at the core of their faith. Sermons focused on healing and the complex nature of human fallibility. Guest pastors were invited to preach on the power of grace and the importance of compassion in the face of wrongdoing. As the weeks turned into months, the community slowly began to heal, using their faith as a tool to bridge the divides the scandal had caused. The church, once a symbol of peace and community, began to regain its standing, not as a place of perfection, but as a refuge for imperfect people seeking to grow and improve together. The scandal that rocked Hopeful Spirit Church was a painful but ultimately transformative episode. It served as a poignant reminder of the vulnerabilities inherent in human leaders and the resilience of a community guided by faith, compassion, and a shared commitment to move forward stronger and more united in their understanding of each other's flaws and strengths. As the dust began to settle on the tumultuous events at Hopeful Spirit Church, a somber gathering marked a pivotal moment for the community. Pastor Michael Robinson, now recovering and reflective, addressed his congregation with a humility and vulnerability that had rarely been seen in him before. Standing before those who had once looked to him as an unwavering moral guide, Michael openly admitted to his failings and the secret relationship with Jacob that had led to such disastrous consequences. His voice, though steady, was tinged with sorrow as he sought forgiveness from those he had misled and hurt. The church, filled with members both supportive and skeptical, listened intently as Michael committed to a path of redemption, both personal and communal. He spoke of the lessons he had learned about integrity, the dangers of hidden truths, and his hope to restore trust, albeit acknowledging that it might take time, perhaps longer than he had to give. Simultaneously, the legal proceedings involving Jacob unfolded, casting a shadow on the young man's future. In court, Jacob faced the consequences of his actions, born out of hurt and betrayal, but magnified by desperation and a lack of guidance at a critical moment. His defense highlighted his emotional turmoil and the complex relationship that had so influenced his actions, appealing to the court for leniency based on the unique circumstances that led to the tragedy. Capital punishment disruption, truth. There's little secrecy regarding what happened after the skyrocketing profile of my younger brother, hence my secret safety. Both Michael's confession and Jacob's trial underscored the profound personal and communal toll of the incident. The community was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about leadership, trust, and the expectations placed on those in positions of authority. The church had to reflect on how inclusivity, accountability, and transparency in handling conflicts could prevent such crises in the future. The resolution of these events brought a cautious optimism to Hopeful Spirit Church. Members began to engage in deeper, more open dialogues about their expectations and their roles within the spiritual community. Many found a renewed faith not just in God, but in the potential for human forgiveness and growth after faltering. As Hopeful Spirit Church moves forward, it stands as a testament to the power of community and faith in navigating the darkest times. But the story also poses a question that extends beyond the walls of any single institution. How do we balance forgiveness and accountability, not just in our leaders, but in ourselves? If you found this exploration of human complexity, faith, and redemption compelling, don't forget to subscribe to True Crime Stories ZM for more insightful analyses and real-life stories that challenge our perceptions and provoke deeper understanding. What do you think? Are we all just one bad decision away from a downfall, or does our capacity for redemption define us more accurately than our missteps?